In the sprawling empire of ancient Rome, power was maintained not only by its legions, politics, and wealth, but also by the calculated use of terror. Among its most notorious tools of control was the crucifixion, a slow, agonizing, and very public form of execution that served as a chilling warning to anyone who might defy Rome. As authority, it is a practice we often associate with the story of Jesus Christ. But the Romans crucified thousands of people long before and long after that moment, especially rebellious slaves, captured enemies, and those deemed threats to the state. For Rome, this was not just punishment, it was theater, and every execution was staged for maximum impact. The origins of crucifixion in Rome are not entirely Roman. Historians believe the practice was borrowed from earlier civilizations like the Carthaginians and Persians, but Rome perfected it into a devastating spectacle. By the late Republic and throughout the imperial period, crucifixion had become the ultimate penalty for the lowest members of society. Roman citizens, except in extreme cases of treason, were spared this fate. Instead, crucifixion was reserved for foreigners, criminals of the worst kind, and, most infamously, slaves who dared to resist or rebel against their masters. In the Roman worldview, a slave was not a person in the full sense, but property and object to be owned, used, and discarded. This cold legal reality made it easier for the ruling elite to inflict unimaginable suffering on them if a slave killed their master. Roman law allowed for all slaves in the household to be executed in retaliation. Whether guilty or not, crucifixion was often the chosen method in such cases, because it did more than just kill the condemned, it sent a message. The sight of a fellow slave writhing in agony on a cross was meant to crush the spirit of resistance and those who remained alive. One of the most infamous mass crucifixions in Roman history followed the slave uprising. Led by Spartacus in 73 to 71 BCE, Spartacus, a gladiator and former soldier, led tens of thousands of escaped slaves in a revolt that shook Rome to its core. After years of brutal fighting, the rebellion was finally crushed. The Roman general Marcus Licinius Crassus ordered the crucifixion of approximately 6,000 captured rebels. Their bodies lined the Via Appia, the main road between Capua and Rome, stretching for over 100 miles. Travelers along the road would have passed corpse after corpse, the stench of death hanging in the air for weeks, a grotesque reminder of Rome's might and the cost of defiance. The process of crucifixion itself was carefully designed to prolong suffering. It often began with a savage scourging. The condemned would be tied to a post and whipped with a flagrum, a Roman whip embedded with pieces of bone, metal, or lead. Each lash tore into the flesh, leaving deep gashes, breaking muscle, and sometimes even exposing bone. Many victims collapsed from blood loss before the actual crucifixion began. Yet, for those strong enough or unfortunate enough to survive the scourging, the ordeal had only just begun. Next came the patibulum, the horizontal crossbeam that the condemned would be forced to carry to the site of execution. Contrary to popular belief, the victim rarely carried the entire cross. The upright stake, or stipes, was usually fixed in the ground at the place of crucifixion. The patibulum, however, could weigh 75 to 125 pounds, and carrying it through crowded streets after a brutal scourging was a punishment in itself. Roman soldiers would lead the procession, ensuring that as many people as possible witnessed the condemned's humiliation. Crowds gathered not only out of morbid curiosity, but also to jeer, mock, or hurl insults. In Rome, public executions were as much a form of entertainment as a grim lesson. Upon reaching the execution site, the condemned would be stripped naked, a final act of degradation, and either nailed or tied to the crossbeam. Nailing was the more painful method, and although popular imagery shows nails driven through the palms, historical evidence suggests they were often hammered through the wrists to better support the body's weight. The patibulum was then hoisted onto the upright stipes, and the victim's feet were either nailed or tied in place. The position was designed to make breathing difficult. The arms, stretched out and raised, caused the chest muscles to tighten, forcing the victim to push up with their legs in order to inhale. This constant struggle between exhaling and inhaling exhausted the body, and as the hours or days passed, the victim's strength would fade until they could no longer lift themselves to breathe. Death by crucifixion was rarely quick, depending on the circumstances. It could take hours or even days. Exposure to the sun, dehydration, exhaustion, and shock all played a part in killing the victim. Birds of prey and insects would land on the helpless body, pecking and biting at exposed flesh. Rain might bring temporary relief, but the cold of night would add to the agony. Roman soldiers sometimes hastened death by breaking the victim's legs with a heavy club, a practice known as Crucifixion, making it impossible for them to push up and breathe. The execution site was deliberately chosen for maximum visibility. In cities, crosses might be set up near gates, marketplaces, or along major roads where traffic was heavy. In military campaigns, Roman generals used crucifixion to terrify conquered peoples. Whole rows of crosses could be erected outside a rebellious city, each bearing a victim left to die in plain sight of those inside. It was not just punishment, it was propaganda, a way to show that Rome was a power that could not be challenged without the most dire consequences. For the Romans, crucifixion was more than just a death sentence. It was the destruction of a person's dignity, identity, and humanity. The slow pace of the execution turned the victim into a living billboard for the empire's authority. Every gasp, every cry of pain, every drop of blood was part of the message: Rome is supreme, and defiance will be met with the cruelest retribution imaginable. Accounts from ancient historians and philosophers reveal the deep fear crucifixion inspired. The Roman statesman Cicero called it the most cruel and disgusting penalty, insisting that the word cross should be far from the thoughts, eyes, and ears of Roman citizens. Yet for slaves, rebels, and foreigners, the cross was an ever-present threat. This legal and cultural divide reinforced the Roman social hierarchy, where the elite were shielded from the most brutal punishments, while the powerless bore the full weight of the law's cruelty. Sometimes crucifixion was used not for justice, but for political theater. Emperors and governors might order it as a show of strength after quelling unrest. Roman provincial governors, seeking to keep conquered territories in line, crucified local leaders or troublemakers to demonstrate their control. In Judea, for example, Roman authorities crucified thousands during times of revolt, ensuring the Jewish population understood the price of rebellion. The psychological impact on the living cannot be overstated. For slaves, the memory of seeing someone they knew left to die on a cross would linger long after the body was gone. It wasn't just the brutality, it was the helplessness, the realization that the same fate could befall them for the slightest act of defiance. For common citizens in conquered lands, the cross was a reminder that their lives were not entirely their own, that Rome's laws reached into every corner of their existence. Over time, crucifixion became such a symbol of Roman authority that it was used even for symbolic purposes in art and literature. Writers referenced it as the ultimate form of suffering, and artists depicted it to evoke pity or horror. Yet for those who actually endured it, there was no poetry, only pain. Ancient records rarely tell us the names of the crucified. They vanish into history as anonymous figures, known only by the crime Rome accused them of committing. Their silence speaks volumes about the imbalance of power in the ancient world. Despite its cruelty, crucifixion remained a cornerstone of Roman punitive measures for centuries. Only in the 4th century AD, when Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity, was the practice officially abolished. By then, the cross had taken on a completely different meaning for Christians, symbolizing sacrifice, redemption, and hope rather than oppression and terror. But in the days of the Republic and Empire, it was a tool of fear, wielded with precision to maintain control over a vast and diverse population. The brutality of crucifixion, especially against slaves, underscores a fundamental truth about Roman society. It was built not only on military might and political skill, but also on an unflinching willingness to use terror as a means of governance. Rome's roads, aqueducts, and monuments were marvels of engineering, but the empire was also paved with the suffering of those who dared to oppose it. The crosses along the Via Appia after the Spartacus revolt were as much a part of Rome's infrastructure as its stone highways, a grim reminder that beneath the glory of the empire lay the bodies of countless victims. Today, we remember crucifixion largely through the lens of religion, but in its original context, it was a statement of absolute power. The Romans understood that a single execution in private might punish one person, but a crucifixion in public could control thousands. It was a performance designed to instill fear, crush rebellion, and uphold a system in which the powerful ruled without challenge. In the dusty heat of an afternoon along a Roman road, a traveler in the 1st century might have walked past a line of crosses. On each, a human figure hung suspended, struggling for breath, covered in dirt, blood, and the marks of the whip. Flies buzzed around the wounds, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. Soldiers stood guard, their armor glinting in the sun, not to protect the dying, but to ensure no one dared to help them. Children might have clung to their mothers, averting their eyes, while merchants passing through whispered warnings to their companions. Every person who saw this scene would carry it in their memory, a mental scar reinforcing the order of the Roman world. This was the reality for countless slaves and enemies of Roman reality, where the cross was not a symbol of faith, but a weapon of domination. In the hands of the empire, crucifixion was a sentence worse than death itself. It was the destruction of body and spirit, played out under the open sky for all to see, leaving an image burned into the minds of those who lived to tell the tale. If you've been shocked, intrigued, or even horrified by what you just learned, then you've only scratched the surface of humanity's darkest past. Torture's room is where history's cruelest, most twisted, and most unbelievable punishments are brought back to life in all their raw detail. From ancient execution methods to medieval horrors and forgotten cultural rituals, we uncover the stories most people can't handle. If you think you're brave enough to face more, hit that subscribe button right now, turn on notifications, and join a community that doesn't shy away from the truth every week. You'll witness the extremes of human cruelty and maybe even question how far civilization has really come. This is Torture's Room. Enter if you dare.